This is Driving Solutions, exclusively on CBTNews.com.
Many of today's automotive consumers do the bulk of their shopping online, so there's an extra pressure on dealers to make sure transactions are done smoothly and stay consistent to the digital experience. Add to this the lack of inventory and affordability concerns, and the room for error gets even smaller. To that end, dealers must ensure they have the right data to inform and drive each touch point, from enriching consumer identity data to improving call answer rates, to delivering connected and secure car buying experiences. Joining us now to share how dealers can better optimize their operations is Satyan Merchant, Senior Vice President of Automotive at TransUnion. Thanks so much, Satyan, for joining us today.
Great to be here, Jim.
Great. So let's jump right in here. Given the changing market and what we have seen over the past few years, why is it important now more than ever for auto dealers to focus efforts on how they optimize the way they sell cars?
Great. So, there's a lot going on, Jim, in the auto industry, as you and many of those who are watching are well aware. It's really this confluence of a few different factors going on, which is leading us and the industry to really be a lot more mindful on how to engage with consumers in a digital environment. You touched about it. You touched on it in the intro around the affordability and inventory challenges that exist today. That just there's fewer cars available, and in some cases fewer consumers that are coming through the door at a dealership purchasing a vehicle, given the economic environment today. And then the other part of it is, even for those who do come through the door, or those interested in shopping, the consumer expectations have simply changed over the last number of years, and I think that was accelerated through the pandemic, where a consumer truly expects to be shopping for anything, whether it's something from an online retailer all the way to a vehicle, where they want, when they want, and how they want. A lot of that is digitally and online, and so a dealer and any auto retailer needs to be able to modernize in terms of how are they engaging that consumer? Do they even know that consumer? And how do they touch them at all points of the vehicle purchasing experience, from the research phase all the way to driving that vehicle off the lot?
You mentioned identity data, so let's start there. Why is identity data hygiene and enrichment important? And what makes TransUnion unique as a provider of identity solutions?
Yeah, so identity is the underpinning of any consumer experience. And so it's important on a number of factors. In the auto retail space, it's very interesting. It's different from many or most other digital experiences when it comes to identity, because auto transactions are far and few between, but they're very big, high dollar transactions. I'll give you an example. My family recently, in the last year or two, purchased a new vehicle from the same dealership. But the last time we purchased a vehicle from them was over 7 years ago. And that's consistent with the trend these days, where vehicles are staying on the road longer and consumers are coming less frequently to purchase a new vehicle. And it just kind of got exacerbated during the pandemic. And so over the course of those 7 years, in my example, our address changed, the number of people in our household changed, where we worked changed, my spouse and I, my partner and I. And so lots of different changes about a consumer, including the information about them, occur over the time when a consumer comes in to shop for a vehicle. CRM data that we understand at dealerships is typically or commonly outdated, and there's lots of missing information. Again, in the last 10 years or so, more and more people are willing to share things like their email addresses, and maybe the last time they came into a dealership, their email address changed, right? Or their place of work changed. So identity is critical in terms of really drive understanding the consumer by a dealership in terms of who that person is and what their preferences are. Another part of that, not only knowing who I am, but then a dealership, when they go out to create an experience, whether it's an online shopping experience on their first party or on their dealer website, or if it's through an aggregator or some other partner in the ecosystem, or if it's simply other ways of advertising to a consumer, if the underpinning of that data is incorrect, then it's a lot harder for a dealership to create the right audience or really get the right profile of that consumer. In order to advertise and meet them in the right place at the right time. So that identity is critically important for creating that experiences, for engaging the consumer upfront and doing the advertising and marketing. And then once you've got that lead, which would be a higher quality lead if you actually know who you're talking to, just giving that consumer the experience where they don't have to then walk, if they come into the dealership, into the store, they don't have to tell you everything about themselves once again. They already did it on a form online. They don't want the experience to tell you who they are when they walk through the door.
Sure. Yeah, that's probably the most frustrating thing for a consumer, when they've got to start the whole process all over again. And we in retail automotive seem to be late to the party on that one, but very, very important for the consumers. So while we all understand the need to protect sensitive data, why should dealers be focused on it as part of their identity strategy?
Great question, Jim. You know, when the topic of protecting data and data sensitivity and security comes up, I think most people think immediately on sort of the negative side or the defensive side, and it's one of the two parts of it. But I think there's a carrot and a stick here. So the stick is simply the importance and the obligation of any retailer to protect data, especially PII or personal data. There's a lot of information out there and a lot of examples to point to in terms of when a business doesn't protect data well, there are large consequences for the consumer and regulatory and so forth. So that's sort of probably known and a bit of the obvious side of the answer. I think the other side of that is that getting the right data and protecting that data, having the safeguards in place to protect data, really open up opportunities for dealerships that are thinking more advanced or next generation in terms of acquisition and marketing, in terms of usage of that data if it's in a secure place. So an example is using a clean room, which is a technology from TransUnion that will help safeguard personally identifiable information and other secure data. A clean room is an opportunity where a dealership could maybe partner with their OEM, if it's a franchise dealer, and collaborate with data that's held somewhere else at the OEM, for instance. And if you don't have the right data security strategy in place, there's no ball game there. If you don't have the right data strategy, any other partner would not be willing to share data or collaborate with you in that way. So to invest in that data security, of course, it helps on the regulatory and just kind of the care and the security point of view, but it also opens up the opportunity with collaboration, using a clean room, activating audiences, and doing a few other things with multiple data sets coming together.
While consumers are demanding digital experiences while shopping for vehicles, most transactions still involve an offline component. What can dealers do to ensure the digital to in-person handoff is smooth?
Yeah, that's also a great question, because I'll cite some information. This is from Cox Automotive from a few years ago in 2021, where 76% of consumers said they would be open to a fully digital transaction for purchasing a vehicle. And I think that's a signal that this is where consumers want to go. Today, not 76, far fewer than 76% of transactions are actually done fully digitally.
That's right.
So to your point, Jim, it is still in a world of what we would call online to offline, or a full multiple touch point experience, some of which is digital, some of it which goes offline. Maybe there's some parts that go back online. That's how the world is today with automotive retailing. And I expect that to continue for some time, right? I don't think we're going to get to 70, 80, 90% fully digital transactions anytime soon. So what is it that's really important to make sure that's a good experience? I think there's three pillars that we think about. One is around the identity, with which we've talked about, again, knowing who that consumer is offline and online. Two is on the contactability. And so that really speaks to once the consumer goes off their device, off the computer, we have experienced that many transactions require a phone call. And a phone is still one of the best channels to work with a customer. And another thing that's interesting is that all generations are interested in that human interaction, that human touch when buying a vehicle. And in fact, even the youngest generations, which some may assume are the ones that want to go fully digital, well, oftentimes the younger generation it's the first vehicle they've purchased. They want to speak to somebody. They want to come in and touch.
That's a good point. They want that consultation.
They want the consultation, and they value the dealer. Now, the key is, can you make the right contact if you're an auto dealer, right? So if I or you have been doing some shopping online, at some point we've generated a lead to our local dealership, for instance, and we, and especially the younger generation, is not that interested in answering every single phone call. So if a dealership really needs to make sure that their calls are going through to the end customer in a secure way, with the name of the dealership being displayed, and even a brand. That's one of the key solutions we have at TransUnion is a full branding of the call in terms of who's making that phone call.
Okay.
That's far more likely a consumer is going to know that Jim Fitzpatrick dealership is calling, and that's the same dealership that I was interacting with online.
Right.
And that will really help me when I pick up my phone and say, hey, I want to continue this transaction. They know who I am.
That's right.
I told them who I am, and they're calling me back. And that's the way I want to work with Jim Fitzpatrick Auto, right?
That's right.
And so having tools for contactability are critically important to continue that experience from behind the screen into on the phone and then ultimately in person.
Sure.
I'd say the last piece here I want to add to is just kind of some sounds basic, but probably really important and has evolved over time, is doing the transition from the online to the offline through pre-fill and other verification tools that should exist on every dealer website, in my opinion. So I think what we found in our survey is consumers like to engage online, but they really abandon at a very high rate if it's very challenging to simply give information. When you and I started talking, we mentioned that, giving the same information over and over again is not a good experience. And even if I've got 3 pages of information to fill in a form before I want to make a transaction or engage with the dealership, that's usually an area where I'm just don't have the patience for that, right?
Yeah.
And so coming back to that identity, if I could simply give on the website a couple pieces of information, and there's verified, knowledgeable ways to pre-fill the rest, including information about my vehicle and other, address and other secure ways to pre-fill that information from a trusted source, right? Like a TransUnion.
Yeah.
Then it really improves that digital experience, and the consumer feels like, hey, it's a couple of clicks and I've got the right consult giving me a phone call.
Yeah, for sure. So we know that affordability continues to be a challenge. Many dealers and lenders are leveraging pre-qualification to allow people to compare and shop for monthly payments. But there is still, a lot of friction. How does TransUnion help solve this?
Right. And so pre-qualification, again, from our survey, we found, number one, that over 62% of consumers stated that in some form they pre-qualified before purchasing a vehicle in the last year. That could be on an OEM website, it could be on a dealer website, it could be through a shopping tool or an aggregator. So pre-qualification is growing. It's a really important tool for that affordability piece, because a pre-qualification allows the consumer to know what they can afford upfront in the process. Again, as I was talking about before, getting to that pre-qualification is a process that requires what we call the right level of friction. So, because it draws on credit data and information about a consumer that they have to give consent to and provide, it's not something that should be released or even is legally released, for every single consumer. The consent has to be provided.
Sure.
Again, the consumer shouldn't have to go through 3 pages of filling out forms and giving consent in order to find out what they can afford.
Yeah.
And so it is critical to improve that experience. It also helps, by the way, what we found is that dealers find that a consumer who goes through their pre-qual experience shows a lot more intent. It actually creates a really strong lead. It's a signal that a consumer isn't just browsing and looking at nice pictures of cars and trucks, but they want to buy something. So the dealer, I think, if the consumer wants to give that consent, I think the dealer really needs to recognize, hey, this consumer is serious. It's a hot lead, and we should make it as easy as possible, as friction-free as possible, but at the same time, doing the right amounts of verification checks, making sure the identification, back to what we were talking before, the ID is right, making sure fraud, right, may not be perpetrating right now. And so there again, TransUnion has a ton of tools, given that we're in this privileged position of being a credit bureau where, we touch the data that drives a pre-qualification, and we have experience doing this across many industries. I think the auto industry is one that's moving to where, other banking and lending industries have been for a while. And again, it's back to the consumer demand. The consumer wants that experience. They want to know what they can afford, and they want to do it in a way where they're not spending 10, 15 minutes filling out a form.
Yeah, for sure. And, this is something that now is very, very important, because as we see these lots starting to fill back up with inventory, and it's not like it was a year ago or 2 years ago where you sold every vehicle in stock. These things matter to a dealership, the success of a dealership, right? I mean, you've got to be able to be there where the customer, meet the customer where they are. And while digital sales are not 70, 80, 90% of your productivity, everybody starts out online and they want that to be a smooth transition into the showroom, right? I mean, this is very, very, very timely right now. So for dealers that are out there listening to us have this conversation, this is an area that you really want to check on in your dealership. Maybe shop your dealership to see how it goes, but certainly open up these conversations with your staff, with your team, to make sure that you're covered in these areas for sure. Obviously, TransUnion is an incredible provider. That's why we bring them in here at CBT News. So Satyan Merchant, Senior Vice President of Automotive at TransUnion, thank you so much for your insights today. It was a true pleasure having you on the show. Love to have you back to do a follow-up on this issue because I know it's an important one for dealers.
Absolutely. I would love to do that. Thanks again for having me, Jim.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks for watching Driving Solutions, exclusively on CPTnews.com.